The air in the desert carries more than heat and sand. It carries the sound of an empire breathing. We sweep across the vast, sun-bleached expanse of the Arabian Peninsula, c. 690 CE. The land is a tapestry of brutal beauty. Golden dunes that shift like living things, black basalt mountains clawing at a sky of relentless blue, and sparse, stubborn oases where life clings with green fingers. The wind doesn't whisper here, it rasps, scouring stone and soul alike. This is not empty land. It is a land of motion. Caravans, long lines of camels like stitches on a tan hide, move with a slow, swaying purpose along ancient incense routes. Their bells are a dull, rhythmic percussion against the wind's drone. And cutting through these ancient rhythms, a new, sharper sound, the disciplined tramp of boots, the jingle of harnesses, the low murmur of command in Arabic. We follow one such column. They are not a raiding party, but something more formidable, the mailed fist of a new order. At their head rides a man. Not old, but with an old intensity in his eyes. Musa ibn Nusayr. He does not look like a legend yet. He looks like a commander, feeling the weight of a horizon. His face is shaded by a turban, the fabric gritty with fine dust. He feels the heat as a physical pressure, a heavy blanket laid over his shoulders. The sweat traces paths through the grime on his neck, cool for a fleeting moment before evaporating. He hears everything, the crunch of gravel underfoot, the snort of a horse, the distant cry of a desert hawk. But beneath it, he hears the silence. The immense, waiting silence of lands beyond his knowing. His thoughts are not of conquest, but of foundation. The memory of the previous episode, the chaos, the consolidation, the fierce loyalty sworn in shadowed tents, is a fresh wound and a fresh strength. He was plucked from obscurity, some say from captivity, his destiny tied to the great Umayyad machine. Now he is its instrument. The Caliphate is a young giant, stretching from the edges of Persia to the shores of North Africa. But its hold is tenuous, its bones still knitting. Musa has been sent to its bleeding edge, to the province of Iraq, to be the architect of stability. To turn submission into administration. To make the idea of Damascus real in a land of shifting allegiances. We see it through his eyes. A dusty fort, recently taken. The smell is a mix of old blood, new mortar, and animal dung. Arab soldiers in ringed mail work, alongside local converts, their languages a turbulent stream. The sound of swords is not of battle here, but of industry, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer straightening a bent blade, the scrape of a whetstone on steel. It is the sound of an empire building its teeth. Musa dismounts, his muscles stiff. The desert heat soaks into his robes. He walks past a squad drilling, their movements sharp, their shouts echoing off mud-brick walls. He nods, a silent approval. His authority is quiet, earned. He enters a Spartan room that serves as his command post. A map, crudely drawn on parchment, is weighted down by a dagger. His finger traces a line westward, across the blank space labeled the Great Desert. His internal monologue is a low, constant hum beneath the sounds of the camp. They see only sand and ghosts, he thinks, looking at the apprehensive faces of some younger officers. They do not see the arteries of trade, the veins of rivers yet unseen, the pulse of cities sleeping under other stars. To build a road, you must first believe in the destination. A messenger arrives, dust-caked and breathless. He brings a sealed letter from Damascus. The wax bears the Caliph seal. Musa breaks it, his face impassive. The orders are clear, yet vast. Consolidate. Secure the revenues. Prepare the ground. The whisper is becoming a command. That night, under a cloak of stars, so thick they seem like sand thrown against the void, Musa stands alone on the ramparts. The desert wind is cooler now, carrying the scent of distant sage. The campfires below are tiny, brave blossoms of light in the immense dark. He feels the scale of it all, the ambition of his Caliph, the fragility of his forces, the sheer, daunting geography of destiny. This is not the beginning of a raid. It is the first, deliberate step onto a stage that spans continents. The whispers of the empire's dawn are growing into a steady wind. And Musa ibn Nusayr, his feet planted on the dusty edge of the known world, must decide how to build a ship sturdy enough to sail upon it. The chapter closes on his silhouette against the starry sky, a solitary figure listening to the future howl in the dark. The journey from this fort to the shores of an ocean he has never seen begins here, in the furnace of the present, with the weight of an empire's whisper on his shoulders. The sun, a molten disk in the eastern sky, beat down upon the ancient walls of Basra. For Musa ibn Nusayr, the rhythm of command had become second nature. Years of service, first under his father, then forging his own path through the harsh landscapes of Iraq and Syria, had honed him into a leader of formidable repute. His name, whispered with respect in barracks and fear in enemy camps, now carried the weight of victories hard won, territories secured. He had brought order to restive tribes, discipline to scattered legions, and his gaze, sharp and unwavering, seemed to hold the very blueprint of the future. This morning, however, as he reviewed a new contingent of cavalry in the sprawling parade grounds, a different kind of tension hung in the air. The usual clang of steel on steel, the sharp commands of sergeants, the thud of hooves against the packed earth, all seemed to diminish as a lone rider, dust-caked and weary, spurred his mount towards Musa's position. The rider's standard, though travel-worn, bore the unmistakable insignia of the Caliphate, its golden embroidery shimmering faintly in the rising heat. Musa watched, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. A caliphal messenger, travelling so far and with such urgency, could only signify one thing: a new decree, a fresh challenge. As the rider dismounted, bowing low, a sealed parchment was presented. The Caliph's personal seal, intricate and authoritative, pressed into the wax, seemed to pulse with unspoken power. Musa took the scroll, its parchment cool against his fingertips, then rough beneath his thumb as he broke the seal. The words, pennied in the elegant script of the Caliphate's scribes, slowly unfurled before his eyes. It was a summons, not a mere instruction. A summons from Damascus, from the heart of the Umayyad Empire, from the mighty Walid ibn Abd al-Malik, the Caliph whose writ ran from the Indus to the borders of Byzantium. Walid. The name itself was a testament to ambition, a force of nature whose empire was ever expanding, ever demanding new frontiers. And now his gaze, like the setting sun, was turning west. The letter spoke of Ifriqiya, the vast, untamed lands of North Africa. A region as pivotal as it was perilous. Governors before Musa had struggled there, their efforts often undone by rebellious Berber tribes, by the sheer logistical nightmare of distance, by the ever-present threat of Byzantine incursions from the sea. It was a land of shifting sands and shifting loyalties, a place where the Islamic presence was a fragile veneer over an ancient, defiant spirit. Musa's mind raced, a whirlwind of strategy and memory. He recalled the tales of previous campaigns, the sacrifices, the slow, grinding progress. The Caliph's words were clear. He sought a leader of unparalleled capability, someone who could not only hold the line but push it, consolidate power, and prepare the way for further conquests. He sought Musa. A low murmur rippled through the gathered officers as Musa stood, silent and still, the parchment held firmly in his hand. The weight of it was immense, a physical manifestation of the trust, the expectation, the sheer audacity of the task. He could feel the desert heat on his face, taste the dust on his tongue, but his thoughts were miles away, across the vast expanse of the known world, towards the turbulent shores of the Maghreb. He thought of his family, of the life he had built, now poised on the brink of another upheaval. But beneath the apprehension, a spark ignited, the familiar thrill of the unknown, the call of destiny. This was not merely a promotion. It was a testament, an acknowledgement of his unique abilities, a challenge that few men could shoulder. The journey was long, arduous, a testament to the Caliphate's vastness. Musa, leaving Basra behind, traversed deserts where the wind sculpted dunes into transient mountains, where the sun beat down with an unforgiving intensity that bleached bone and parched throat. He rode through ancient lands, past ruins that whispered of forgotten empires, his retinue a constant cloud of dust on the horizon. Each day brought him closer to the western edge of the known world, to the setting sun, lands, to a land where legend and reality blurred. He spent his nights under a canopy of stars, reviewing maps by the flickering light of a lamp, studying the intricate tribal structures of Ifriqiya, the disposition of Byzantine garrisons, the strategic importance of coastal towns. The clinking of his men's armor, the distant calls of desert creatures, the crackle of the campfire, these were the sounds that accompanied his deep contemplation. He listened, too, to the whispers of his seasoned commanders, men who had followed him through countless campaigns, men whose loyalty was absolute. Weeks bled into months. The landscape slowly transformed, the endless sand eventually giving way to more rugged terrain, rocky hillsides, and finally, a glimpse of the vast, shimmering expanse of the Mediterranean. The salty tang of the sea air filled his lungs, a stark contrast to the dust of the interior. This was a land of both promise and peril, a gateway to unimaginable wealth and power, but also a crucible that had broken many before him. As his column finally neared the ancient city of Kairouan, the administrative heart of Ifriqiya, Musa reined in his horse atop a high ridge. Below him, the sprawling settlement lay nestled amidst the rugged landscape, its walls a testament to resilience, its markets a murmur of life. Beyond it, to the west, lay the true challenge, the vast, unconquered lands stretching towards the Pillars of Hercules, towards the fabled ocean that marked the end of the known world. His appointment was more than a mere governorship. It was a gambit, a daring play by the Caliph Walid, an investment in Musa's unyielding will and strategic genius. Musa gazed out at the horizon, the setting sun painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and crimson. The task ahead was monumental, a test of faith, courage, and iron resolve. But Musa ibn Nusayr, the architect of order, the hammer of the caliphate, was ready. He was ready to shape this untamed frontier, ready to push the boundaries of an empire, ready to write his own chapter in history. The setting sun beckoned, and Musa, with a deep breath, urged his horse forward. The saga had truly begun. The wind in Ifriqiya does not merely blow, it hunts. It carries the scent of wild thyme, ancient salt, and the iron tang of blood that has soaked into the red earth for generations. As Musa ibn Nusayr rode west, the horizon was no longer a flat line of hope, but a jagged moor of limestone and dust. Behind him lay the relative safety of Egypt. Before him lay the Maghreb land the Caliphate's generals called the Devourer of Men. Listen to the sound of 10,000 horses. It is not a rhythmic gallop, but a chaotic thunder, muffled by the soft, treacherous sand. Musa felt the grit between his teeth, a constant reminder that this land demands a price from those who seek to tame it. He was no longer the young man, seeking glory in the courts of Damascus. He was a man of 60, his beard silvered by time, his eyes sharpened by the betrayals of politics and the rigors of the frontier. He sat heavy in his saddle, his hand resting on the pummel of a sword that had tasted every soil from the Levant to the Nile. To the north, the Mediterranean shimmered like a blade of polished sapphire, guarded by the dying but still lethal grip of the Byzantine Empire. To the south, the Atlas Mountains rose like the spine of a sleeping titan, home to the Berber tribes, the Amazigh warriors who moved like ghosts through the scrubland. This was the Serpent's Coil. Every valley was a trap, every oasis a potential ambush. Musa looked at the men, riding beside him. He saw the exhaustion in their slumped shoulders and the flickers of doubt in their eyes. They remembered the stories of those who came before. They remembered Uqba ibn Nafi, the lion of the desert, who had ridden his horse into the Atlantic waves only to be cut down in a mountain pass on his return. They remembered the great Kahina, the warrior queen who had scorched the earth so that no invader could eat from its bounty. In Ifriqiya, victory was often just a prelude to a more violent funeral. The air grew heavy as they approached the ruins of what was once the center of the world. The columns of Roman temples stood like skeletal fingers reaching out of the sand, stripped of their marble flesh. Musa signaled for a halt. He dismounted, his boots crunching on the sun-baked clay. He did not look at the gold or the geography. He looked at the shadows. A commander must be more than a soldier. He must be a scholar of the human spirit. Musa knew that his predecessors had tried to break this land with the sword alone. They had treated the Berbers as a conquered tide to be pushed back. But Musa saw something else. He saw a people who, like the wind, could not be caged, but perhaps could be joined. He felt the heat radiating from the ground, a dry, oppressive weight that seemed to suck the moisture from his very bones. "The sand does not bleed," he whispered to himself, his voice a raspy friction against the silence of the dunes. But it remembers those who did. The campaign began not with a grand charge, but with a series of surgical strikes. Musa moved with a calculated, terrifying patience. He watched the way the Berber cavalry moved, how they used the terrain as a weapon, disappearing into the ravines of the Auras Mountains only to strike at the rear of the column under the cover of a sandstorm. In the heat of mid-afternoon, the world becomes a shimmering hallucination. Musa stood atop a ridge, watching a skirmish in the valley below. The sound of steel clashing reached him seconds after the visual discordant, metallic ringing that echoed off the canyon walls. He could smell the sweat of the horses and the acrid smoke of brush fires. His heart hammered against his ribs, not with fear, but with the cold adrenaline of a man who had finally found the puzzle he was born to solve. He realized then that Ifriqiya was not a territory to be occupied. It was a soul to be understood. He saw his soldiers, the Arabs of the desert, struggling against the Berbers, the Moors of the mountains. They were mirrors of each other, hardened, proud, and fiercely independent. The Serpent's coil was tightening, but Musa would not let it crush him. He began to recruit. He began to listen. He offered not just the edge of the sword, but a seat at the table. But the resistance was far from over. In the dark of the night, around the flickering campfires, the scouts brought news of a new gathering in the west. The tribes were uniting under the shadow of the peaks. The Byzantines in their coastal fortresses were funneling gold and weapons to any hand that would strike at the Caliphate's governor. Musa walked through the rows of sleeping men, his cloak billowing in the cold night desert air. The temperature had plummeted, as it always does, turning the world from a furnace into an icebox. He looked toward the west, toward the pillars of Hercules and the unknown world beyond. The path was blocked by fire and steel, by the very blood that seemed to seep from the sands of Ifriqiya. He knew the next few months would define him. He would either be the man who finally broke the serpent, or he would be another ghost haunting the red dunes. He reached down and picked up a handful of earth, letting it trickle through his fingers. It was dry, ancient, and stubborn. "Let the sands bleed," Musa murmured, his eyes reflecting the dying embers of the fire. "We will be the ones who remain when the dust settles." The campaign was no longer just about expansion. It was a bridge being built across a chasm of centuries. As the first light of dawn began to bleed over the eastern horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gold, Musa ibn Nusayr gave the order to march. The Coil was moving. The hunt had begun, and the Maghreb would never be the same again. The sun, a brazen hammer, beat down upon the parched earth, baking the very air Musa breathed. Dust, fine as flour, coated everything, the worn leather of his saddle, the faces of his weary men, the glinting steel of their blades. Before them, silhouetted against the unforgiving sky, stood the walls. Not just walls, but a titan's embrace of stone, rising sheer and defiant from the rugged landscape. This was the fortress of Septem, or perhaps another mighty sentinel guarding the last vestiges of Byzantine power, its name now lost to the ages, yet its formidable presence etched forever into the memory of those who faced it. For weeks they had been here, a persistent tide lapping against an immovable rock. The desert wind, usually a companion, now seemed an accomplice of their enemy, whipping grit into their eyes, carrying the stench of sweat and fear, and sometimes the faint, mocking echo of distant horns from within the citadel. Musa, astride his horse, surveyed the battlements. Each stone, each crenellation, seemed to sneer back at him, a silent testament to the countless lives sacrificed in its construction, and the countless more that would be spent trying to breach it. He felt the weight of every man's gaze upon him, a silent plea, a desperate hope. He saw the fatigue etched around their eyes, the sun-darkened skin stretched taut over sharp cheekbones. These were men who had followed him across searing plains and through treacherous passes, men who had bled for the cause, for the dream of a new order. And now they stood before this colossal barrier, their resolve tested in a crucible of stone and fire. Another assault, a voice whispered within him, weary and cynical. Another futile wave against an unyielding shore. He pushed it down deep, where doubt could not fester. He was Musa ibn Nusayr, and surrender was a word that had no place in his lexicon. He dismounted, the soft crunch of sand under his boots, a stark contrast to the thunder of the siege engines that had so far failed to make a significant dent. He walked among his troops, a silent presence, observing, absorbing. A young soldier, barely more than a boy, sharpened his sword, his brow furrowed in concentration, his hands trembling slightly. Musa paused beside him. "What troubles you, son?" he asked, his voice low, a reassuring rumble amidst the distant clang of metal. The boy looked up, startled, then quickly lowered his gaze. "The walls, my lord. They seem unbreakable." Musa placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, a firm, steadying touch. "No wall is unbreakable, young one. Only the will of men. And our will, I promise you, is stronger." He moved on, his words meant not just for the boy, but for himself. He remembered the desperate campaigns in the mountains, the cunning ambushes, the fierce hand-to-hand combat against the Berber tribes who defended their ancestral lands with the ferocity of cornered lions. He had learned the hard lessons of command, the brutal calculus of war. Every victory had been earned through grit and sacrifice, every defeat a searing brand upon his memory. This siege was different. This was a war of attrition, a test of endurance against an enemy entrenched behind centuries of military architecture. The air shimmered with heat, distorting the view of the fortress, making it seem to dance mockingly. The Byzantine banners, emblazoned with their imperial symbols, snapped defiantly from the highest towers. He could almost hear the jeers of their archers, the distant taunts carried on the wind. He returned to his command tent, the canvas flapping restlessly. Maps were spread across a low table, crude drawings of the fortress, marking watchtowers, gates, suspected weak points. His commanders, hardened veterans all, waited for him. Their faces mirrored his own fatigue, but also their unwavering loyalty. "The northern gate is too heavily fortified," one reported, his voice raspy. "Our engineers have lost 3 sappers attempting to undermine it. The eastern wall shows promise," another offered, "but the approach is a killing ground. Their ballistas have a clear shot." Musa listened, his eyes scanning the crude map, his mind a whirlwind of possibilities and dead ends. He pictured the wall, stone by stone, imagining the men inside, their courage, their desperation. He thought of his own men, their loyalty, their suffering. The scorching sun, the endless nights spent under a vast, indifferent sky. The constant thrum of anxiety in his chest, the heavy weight of responsibility for every life under his command. He ran a hand over his close-cropped beard, feeling the stubble, the weariness. He had seen too many good men fall. He had carried their burdens, their last words, their unspoken prayers. This siege was a crucible, burning away complacency, forging a sharper resolve. He knew that for their mission to succeed, for the new order to truly take root in this vast, untamed land, this wall had to fall. Not just for strategic gain, but as a symbol. A symbol that no fortress, no matter how formidable, could stand forever against the tide of change. A sudden roar erupted from the front lines, followed by the sickening thud of a falling siege ladder. A collective groan swept through the camp. Musa's head snapped up. More men. More blood. The Crucible was heating up, threatening to consume them all. But in that moment, as the cries of battle reached him, a flicker ignited within Musa. Not despair, but a cold, hard determination. There had to be a way. There would be a way. The walls of giants might loom, but the will of the Unyielding would prevail. He would find it. He had to. The fortress of Kaiwan rises from the Tunisian plains like a clenched fist against the sky. Within its walls, Musa ibn Nusayr stands before a map spread across a worn wooden table, his fingers tracing the outline of the Maghreb. The lamplight flickers across his weathered face, casting shadows that make him look older than his 40 years. Outside, the night air carries the distant howl of jackals and the rhythmic footsteps of sentries on the ramparts. He has been appointed Wali of Ifriqiya, by Caliph Abd al-Malik himself. The title sounds grand, but Musa knows the truth. This is not a reward. This is a test. A crucible. The North African territories have devoured every governor sent to tame them, spitting out their bones across the desert sands. The Berber tribes refuse submission. They fight with a ferocity that reminds Musa of his own people, the Banu Lakham, before Islam united them. These warriors of the Atlas Mountains know every canyon, every hidden spring, every ambush point along the ancient Roman roads. They worship their own gods, follow their own queens, and they will not kneel. Musa closes his eyes and listens. In the courtyard below, his soldiers are sharpening their blades. The sound of steel on stone creates a rhythm that speaks of coming violence. He thinks of his father's words, spoken decades ago in the deserts of Arabia. A wise general conquers hearts before he conquers cities. The morning sun transforms the desert into a furnace. Musa rides at the head of 10,000 men, their armor glinting like scales on some massive serpent winding through the dunes. The heat is merciless. Men's lips crack and bleed. Horses stumble. But they push forward, always forward, toward the Berber strongholds that dot the mountains ahead. The first battle comes without warning. The Berbers descend from the heights like a flash flood, their war cries echoing off the canyon walls. Musa feels his horse rear beneath him as arrows darken the sky. The clash of steel on steel becomes a symphony of chaos. A Berber warrior, his face painted with ochre, swings a curved blade toward Musa's neck. The wali of Ifriqiya deflects the blow, feeling the impact shudder through his arm, and counters with a thrust that finds flesh. Blood sprays across the sand, turning it dark and wet. But Musa takes no pleasure in the killing. That night, as his men celebrate their victory, he walks among the wounded, both his own soldiers and the captured Berbers. He kneels beside a young warrior, barely 20, clutching a stomach wound that will likely prove fatal. The young man's eyes burn with hatred and defiance. "What is your name?" Musa asks in the Berber tongue he has been learning. The warrior spits blood. "Why does the Arab care?" "Because I see myself in you," Musa replies quietly. "20 years ago, I fought for my tribe's honor just as you fight now." The young man's expression shifts, confusion replacing hatred for just a moment before pain clouds his features again. This exchange plants a seed in Musa's mind. Over the following months, his strategy shifts. Yes, he continues to fight, continues to push deeper into Berber territory. His reputation grows with each victory. They begin calling him the Hammer of Islam, the man who breaks what cannot be bent. But the hammer also builds. After each battle, Musa offers terms. Not subjugation, but partnership. "Join us," he tells the tribal chiefs. "Keep your customs, your language, your pride." Fight alongside us, not beneath us. Share in the wealth of conquest, not as slaves, but as brothers. Many refuse. Many die. But slowly, incrementally, some begin to listen. The turning point comes at the fortress of Tangier. The Berber queen Dahia, called the Kahina, the central leadershipess, has finally been defeated after years of resistance. Her followers scatter into the mountains, broken and leaderless. Musa could pursue them, could hunt them down and finish what he started. Instead, he sends emissaries with an offer of amnesty. Standing on the walls of Tangier, looking out across the strait toward the distant shores of Hispania, Musa feels the weight of what he has accomplished. The Maghreb is not yet fully pacified, may never be, but the tide has turned. The Berber tribes that once fought against him now fight beside him. Their cavalry, their knowledge of the land, their fierce warrior spirit, all now serve the caliphate. But serve is the wrong word, Musa thinks. They have joined. There is a difference. His lieutenants approach with reports of new recruits, of tribes pledging loyalty, of trade routes reopening. The numbers are impressive. But what strikes Musa most is the face of a young Berber commander named Tariq ibn Ziyad, who has risen through the ranks with remarkable speed. There is something in this man's eyes, a hunger that Musa recognizes because he once felt it himself. "Tell me, Tariq," Musa says, pointing across the water. "What do you see?" Tariq follows his gaze. "Opportunity, my lord," Musa smiles. "Good. Because we are not finished yet." The sun, a relentless eye in the North African sky, beat down upon Musa ibn Nusayr and his army. They had marched for weeks, consolidating gains, pushing deeper into the Maghreb, and now, before them, rose the formidable walls of Tangier. It was the last significant Byzantine stronghold, a defiant sentinel guarding the very edge of the known world, a city whose very existence seemed to mock the relentless tide of conquest. Musa surveyed the battlements from a dust-choked ridge. The city's defenses were strong, built to withstand the fury of the ages, a testament to Roman engineering. He could almost feel the weight of history pressing down on him, the whispers of past emperors and generals who had once held this strategic prize. But this was a different era, a different empire, a different ambition. His gaze drifted beyond the city, across the shimmering strait, to the faint, ethereal outline of mountains on a distant shore. Al-Andalus. A dream, a legend, a land of untold riches and opportunity. But Tangier stood in the way, a stubborn lock on the gateway. A wave of heat rose from the parched earth, making the air shimmer. The smell of sweat, leather, and anticipation hung heavy. Musa's men, a diverse force forged in countless skirmishes, were arrayed below him. Disciplined Arab cavalry, hardy Berber auxiliaries, each man a sinew of determination. Yet he knew their limits. Tangier would not fall easily. Its garrison, a mix of Byzantine regulars and Visigothic allies, was well provisioned and resolute. This would be a test of will, a brutal exchange of blood and iron. "Tomorrow," he murmured, his voice rough from the dust and the weight of command, "the gates will open." One way or another, the siege began with a furious intensity. The air filled with the thud of catapult stones, the hiss of arrows, and the guttural roar of men. Musa, ever the pragmatist, had brought with him not just warriors, but engineers and strategists. Siege towers, painstakingly constructed in the harsh conditions, lumbered towards the walls. Battering rams, massive timbers bound with iron, began their rhythmic, destructive assault on the city gates. The sound was deafening. The splintering wood, the clang of steel, the desperate cries of the defenders, and the answering shouts of the attackers. From his vantage point, Musa watched, his mind a whirlwind of tactical calculations and raw emotion. He saw his men fall, arrows piercing shields, stones crushing bone. He felt the familiar pang of loss, the heavy burden of command. But he also saw their unwavering resolve, their fierce loyalty. They believed in him, in the cause, in the promise of a future beyond these walls. He thought of his family, his sons, of the Caliph in Damascus, of the vast sweep of lands already brought under the banner of Islam. Tangier was not just another city. It was the hinge upon which a new chapter of history would turn. Days bled into nights, and the assault never ceased. The defenders fought with the tenacity of cornered beasts, knowing what defeat meant. But Musa's pressure was relentless. He ordered simultaneous attacks, feints and thrusts, keeping the enemy guessing, stretching their resources thin. The sun continued its relentless assault, baking the men, turning their armor into ovens, their throats raw with thirst. Dust, thick and choking, coated everything, mingling with the acrid smell of smoke and blood. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a breach. A section of the wall, weakened by days of bombardment, crumbled under a final, massive blow from a battering ram. The roar that erupted from Musa's army was primal, a mix of triumph and vengeance. They poured into the gap, a human tide, meeting the desperate last stand of the Byzantine and Visigothic defenders in a brutal, hand-to-hand melee. Swords clashed, shields splintered, and the narrow streets of Tangier ran red with blood. Musa himself, despite his years, led from the front, his presence an inspiration, his sword a blur of motion. Hours later, as the sun began its slow descent, casting long, crimson shadows across the ravaged city, the fighting died down to scattered pockets of resistance. Tangier had fallen. The banner of the Umayyad Caliphate now fluttered defiantly from the highest tower, a stark declaration of a new order. Musa stood on the battlements, his armor heavy, his face streaked with dust and sweat, his body aching with fatigue. Below him, the city lay subdued, its defenders either dead or captured. The sounds of battle were replaced by the groans of the wounded, the quiet commands of officers, and the occasional lament. He looked out, past the broken walls, past the ravaged landscape, to the shimmering waters of the Strait of Gibraltar. And there, across the narrow expanse, still hazy and indistinct, lay the land he had only heard spoken of in whispers and legends, Al-Andalus. A profound sense of awe, mixed with a chilling premonition, washed over him. Tangier was a victory, a monumental achievement. But it was also a threshold, a precipice. Securing this city, this strategic port, was merely the first step. He had forced open the gates, not just to a city, but to an unknown future. The Berbers of the region, fierce and independent, would need to be brought into the fold, their loyalty secured. And beyond them, beyond the strait, lay a kingdom far richer, far more complex than anything he had yet encountered. The bridge had been built, not of stone or timber, but of blood and ambition. Now he had to decide who would cross it, and when. The whispers of Al-Andalus, once a distant dream, now seemed to call to him, a tantalizing, dangerous siren song across the water. The true saga, he knew,